A billionaire real estate developer brought his son's home tutor to his company's most important charity gala. By the end of the night, she had done something that left every person in that room completely silent and changed both their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where in Canada you're watching from tonight. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the very end. Enjoy. Vera Tremblay was in the middle of explaining prime factorization to an 8-year-old who had more interest in the blue crayon he was chewing than in mathematics when the study room door swung open without a knock. Desmond Rourke had that way about him, entering rooms as though they had been waiting for him. "I need to speak with you," he said. His voice carried the flat authority of someone who had been obeyed without question for so long that he had forgotten what a question even sounded like. Vera set her pencil down. "Is something wrong with Finn?" Finn looked up, briefly alarmed, then went back to the crayon. "No. It's about tonight." Desmond crossed his arms. "You're coming with me to the Foundation Gala." She stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" "The Rourke Community Foundation Annual Gala. 8 o'clock. You're coming." Vera stood slowly. "Mr. Rourke, I was hired to tutor your son, not to attend black tie events. The person who was supposed to accompany me tonight had a family emergency. I need someone who's already here and already knows how to act in front of people." He paused. "You qualify." "That's not in my contract." "It is now." He turned toward the door. "Hold on." Vera stepped into the hallway after him. "You can't just reassign me like a piece of furniture." Desmond turned. He had the kind of face that gave nothing away. Strong jaw, gray eyes that processed everything and revealed nothing. But there was a flicker of something when she didn't step back. "I pay generously," he said. "I've arranged a stylist, dress, hair, everything. Finn will be with the housekeeper tonight." Vera crossed her arms. "What exactly is wrong with how I look right now?" He took a careful breath. "What you have is fine. What tonight requires is different." She scoffed. "That's the most diplomatic insult I've ever received." 8 o'clock. Don't be late, and he left. Vera stood in the wide hallway of his Rosedale mansion, heart going faster than she wanted to admit. She walked back to the study room, where Finn was watching her with the serious brown eyes that always seemed to understand more than an 8-year-old should. "You're going to the party with Dad?" "Apparently," she said, sitting back down and pulling his worksheet toward her. "Is that weird?" "A little." "Will you wear a fancy dress?" Vera exhaled. "It's starting to look that way." Finn thought about this with great seriousness. "I think you'd look nice," he said finally. She looked at him. This kid, this quiet, bright boy who still slept with a stuffed bear named Captain and asked her every Tuesday whether she thought clouds had feelings, was the reason she had taken this job. Not Desmond Rourke. Never Desmond Rourke. The stylist arrived at 6:30. Her name was Adeyeze, and she walked in carrying a garment bag and the energy of someone given an assignment she'd been waiting for. "Good bones," Adeyeze said, studying Vera with frank professional interest. "Great posture. You've been hiding." "I haven't been hiding. I've been tutoring." Same thing sometimes. What followed was an hour of something Vera hadn't allowed herself in 3 years. Adeyeze chose a deep emerald gown, structured at the shoulders, elegant without trying, the kind of dress that didn't demand attention so much as command it quietly. Vera's dark hair was pinned loosely, a few waves at her neck. No heavy jewelry, just small gold earrings that had been her mother's. When Vera looked in the mirror, something caught in her throat. She recognized herself. But as the version she had folded away when her mother's diagnosis came in, when the scholarship application had gone unsent, when the life she'd been carefully building had been quietly stored somewhere she stopped visiting. She walked down the grand staircase at 7:58. Desmond was in the foyer, adjusting his cufflinks. When he looked up, he went still. He didn't speak for a moment. His eyes moved across the dress, the hair, the small gold earrings. Then he looked at her directly, and something in his expression was, for the first time, unguarded. "You look," he started. "If the next word is acceptable, I'm going back upstairs." The corner of his mouth shifted, almost a smile. "Presentable," he said. "I'll take it." She moved toward the door. "I'm doing this for Finn's sake, just so we're clear." He deserves a father who occasionally leaves the office." Desmond said nothing, but he held the door open for her. The gala was held at the Fairmont Royal York, one of Toronto's oldest hotels, all gilded ceilings and the kind of quiet that only comes from thick carpets and old money. The Rourke Community Foundation's annual evening was the sort of gathering where charitable commitments were made between courses and every handshake was worth something specific. When Desmond walked in with Vera beside him, the room shifted almost imperceptibly. She was not what people expected. She was too still, too calm. She didn't scan the crowd the way newcomers do, searching for recognition or rank. She simply walked, shoulders straight, eyes genuinely curious, the emerald dress catching the light. The first person to reach them was Nadine Ashworth, Desmond's former fiancée, a corporate lawyer from one of Toronto's most established families. She wore a cream column gown and the kind of smile that was wider at the edges than at the center. "Desmond," she said warmly, then let her gaze settle on Vera. "You brought a guest." "Vera Tremblay," Vera said, extending her hand first. "Firm, good evening." Nadine shook it with her fingertips. "Charming. I don't think we've met. Are you in development?" "I've followed Rourke's community housing projects closely," Vera said, her voice even. "Particularly the Regent Park work." Nadine's smile stayed in place. "How interesting. And what is it that you do?" "Right now, I'm at the table." Vera glanced around pleasantly. "Same as you." Nadine turned slightly toward the men nearby. "Desmond has always had an eye for," she paused, "emerging talent." "That's generous of you," Vera said. "Though I'd argue the most interesting talent is rarely the kind that announces itself." Nadine couldn't quite place that remark. Compliment or challenge, it read as both. That had been entirely deliberate. Desmond watched the exchange with something he hadn't expected to feel: admiration. Through the first hour, Vera moved through the evening naturally. She spoke to the Foundation's community partners with ease, asked questions that showed she had read the annual report, and listened in the way that makes people lean forward without knowing why. At the head table, she found herself beside Dr. Yannick Beausoleil, a professor from Université de Montréal, and the evening's keynote speaker on affordable housing design. When Vera mentioned she had read his 2019 paper on density planning and community trust, he looked at her with genuine surprise. "You read that paper?" "Twice," she said. "I disagreed with your conclusion about green space ratios, but the methodology for resident consultation was the most honest I'd seen at that point." Dr. Beausoleil set his fork down. "You're an urban planner?" Vera hesitated only briefly. "I studied it. Things changed." "What changed?" "Life," she said simply, but the interests didn't. By the time the main course was cleared, Dr. Beausoleil had asked Vera 3 follow-up questions and mentioned her twice to the Foundation's board members seated nearby. Desmond listened from across the table. He had no idea she had ever touched an urban planning textbook. He found himself watching her more than he had watched anyone in a very long time. Then Nadine reappeared, a city councillor at her elbow. "Councillor Ferris," she said smoothly, "I don't believe you've met Desmond's guest tonight, Vera Tremblay." She smiled. "She's actually little Finn's home tutor. Isn't that a lovely thing, that Desmond brought her along?" The table went quiet in that particular way. That means everyone heard, and no one quite knows where to look. Vera felt the words land. She turned to look at Desmond, just for a moment, just long enough to see if he would say something. He didn't. His jaw was tight, his hand on the table was completely still, and he said nothing. Vera turned back to the counselor, then to Nadine, and she took one measured breath. "I am Finn's tutor," she said. Her voice was steady and clear. "And before that I was a cashier, a personal support worker, a night shift cleaner, and the primary caregiver for my mother through 4 years of Alzheimer's disease. I am proud of every single one of those things." She folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate. "Thank you for a lovely evening." She pushed her chair back and walked out. No tears, no raised voice. Just the sound of her heels on marble and the silence she left behind, which lasted considerably longer than anyone was comfortable with. Nadine said something light to fill the air. It didn't land. Dr. Beausoleil excused himself from the table. The counselor found somewhere else to be. Desmond sat alone with his untouched wine and the specific shame of a man who had been handed the exact moment to do something decent and had chosen, instead, to be afraid. He left 20 minutes later. Back at the house that night, after looking in on Finn, already asleep, Captain tucked under one arm. Desmond passed the small table near the coat rack where Vera had left a sketchbook that afternoon. He almost walked past it. He didn't. He sat at the kitchen table and opened it. What he found stopped him cold. Page after page of hand-drawn urban plans, community housing layouts with annotated notes in the margins, a playground design that included accessible entryways and sensory garden features explained in small, careful handwriting, a rezoning proposal for a Hamilton neighborhood that cited 3 academic sources, a draft letter addressed to a housing design scholarship committee at Ryerson, never sent, dated 4 years earlier, explaining that she was withdrawing her application because her mother needed her at home. Desmond sat at that table for a long time. The next morning, he drove east. He found the address from her employment file, a semi-detached house in East Hamilton, modest and well-kept, a small container garden on the front step. A young woman in her early 20s answered the door. She had Vera's eyes and none of Vera's patience for strangers. "You must be Desmond Rourke," she said. Her name was Cleo, and she was clearly not surprised. "She mentioned me," he said. "She mentioned you stayed quiet when it mattered." Cleo leaned against the doorframe. "She didn't need you to protect her from the whole room. She just hoped you wouldn't be part of what the room did to her." Desmond absorbed that, "I know." "Do you actually know, or is this the part where you explain why it was complicated?" He had no answer for that. Cleo studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "She's not here, but come in." The walls of that house held a life Desmond hadn't known existed. Photos of Vera and Cleo with their mother, a small woman with a wide smile who, in the later pictures, looked softer around the edges and more distant. A community newsletter with Vera's name on the volunteer list, a crayon drawing in a cheap frame, a house with an enormous yard, labeled in a child's handwriting, "Our house someday." "She drew that when she was 9, Cleo said. She used to say she was going to design houses for people who couldn't afford the ones she saw downtown. She crossed her arms, and then Mum got sick, and Vera just absorbed it. All of it, no complaint. She just did what needed doing." Desmond drove back to Toronto differently than he had left it. He called a board meeting the following week. He placed Vera's sketchbook on the boardroom table. Not metaphorically, but literally, the worn paper notebook in the center of polished wood, and talked about what was inside it. The board approved a new division, Community Impact Design, with a dedicated budget and full project autonomy. He asked Vera to meet. She chose a coffee shop in Kensington Market, not his office. She arrived in jeans and a canvas jacket, hair loose. She looked entirely like herself, which somehow made her more formidable. "I should have said something," Desmond said, before she'd sat down fully. "Yes," she said, "you should have." I froze. "That's not an excuse, I know that. I just want you to understand that I know exactly what I did and what it cost you." Vera wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "What is it that you want, Desmond?" He slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer: Director of Community Design, Rourke Foundation, full autonomy, her own team, guaranteed budget, no board vetoes on community-facing work, no social outcomes repurposed as marketing copy. She read it carefully, twice. "This is real," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Completely." She looked up. "I have conditions." "I expected that." She pulled a folded page from her jacket pocket. He noticed she had come prepared. When she was finished reading her terms, she extended her hand. He shook it. What followed was quieter than either of them expected, and more substantial than either of them had planned. Vera built her team from people who had been passed over. A fourth-year architecture student from a low-income background who'd been turned down for internal positions twice. A former city social worker who knew every gap that spreadsheets missed and would never appear in one. Together, they launched a community consultation process in 3 Hamilton neighborhoods that had never once been formally asked what they needed from developers. The work was real. The results were measurable. Within 4 months, Rourke's foundation had earned more genuine credibility than a decade of press releases had ever managed. Desmond changed, too, quietly and without announcement. He stopped presenting from the front of boardrooms and started showing up at build sites. He asked questions he didn't know the answers to. Once, during a volunteer day, at a new community playground in the East End, someone handed him a drill and pointed at a bench frame that needed finishing, and he just helped. A photo of it ended up online. The comments were the kindest things the internet had said about him in years. Finn noticed before anyone else did. Children always do. "You're home for dinner more," Finn said one evening matter-of-fact. "I'm trying to be," Desmond said. Vera says people who are always busy sometimes use it as a hiding place. Desmond looked at his son carefully. "Did she say that to you?" "She said it when I was pretending to do homework so I didn't have to talk about Mum." Finn shrugged one shoulder. "I think it works for grown-ups too." Vera started coming back to the house, not as tutor, but because Finn asked, and because Desmond had quietly, carefully asked as well. She and Finn built elaborate crayon maps of imaginary cities across the kitchen floor, while Desmond sat on the couch pretending to read the paper and not turning any pages. One evening Finn fell asleep between them, his head against Vera's arm. The television was off. The house was warm and still. "He told his class I was his best friend," Vera said softly, looking down at him. Desmond watched the two of them. Something shifted in his chest, something he had not felt in a very long time and had not expected to feel again. "He's right," he said quietly. She looked up at him. Neither of them said anything more that night. But something had been acknowledged between them, and acknowledgement has a weight all its own. Nadine Ashworth made one final attempt. She passed a suggestion to a lifestyle journalist, carefully worded, technically unverifiable, that a woman with no credentials was shaping decisions at a major development firm. The story nearly ran. It didn't, because Dr. Yannick Biozalael sent the journalist an unsolicited note explaining that Vera Tremblay was among the most rigorous thinkers he had encountered at any professional level, and that he had invited her to co-present at a national housing conference in Ottawa that spring. The story died. Nadine had nothing left to plant. The conference in Ottawa was where Desmond finally understood something he had been circling for months without quite reaching. He watched Vera stand at a podium in front of 400 housing professionals and talk about the community consultation work with the kind of clarity that makes people forget to take notes because they are too busy listening. She talked about a woman in Hamilton who had told her that no one from any development company had ever once asked what color she wanted her front door to be. "That door matters," Vera said. "It matters because it's hers. And if we are building communities without asking people what they want their front door to look like, we are building for ourselves, not for them." 2 full seconds of silence, then the applause started. Desmond, seated in the third row, didn't applaud right away. He was watching her, the way she stood, easy and grounded, like someone who had found the place where everything she'd been carrying for years could finally be set down and put to use. He drove home from Ottawa knowing what he wanted. He took 3 weeks to plan it properly, because Vera deserved something that had been thought about. The opening of the Rourke Foundation's first completed community housing complex. 16 units in East Hamilton, designed with full resident input, a shared garden, accessible entryways, and a common room with a wall-length window that caught the morning light, was held on a Saturday in May. The residents had moved in the day before. The courtyard was full. Vera's team was there. Finn was there in a bright blue rain jacket because the sky was overcast, though by the time the ribbon was cut, the clouds had pulled back and warm light came through. Vera was talking with one of the new residents, a grandmother who had been on a housing wait list for 6 years, when she heard Finn say, loudly and with purpose, over the noise of the crowd, "Dad, is it time?" She turned. Desmond was crossing the courtyard toward her. Finn walked at his side carrying a small wooden box with both hands. The way he carried things he was determined not to drop. The people around them went quiet in that organic way, not because anyone asked them to, but because something in the moment announced itself. Desmond stopped in front of her. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want to say it here, in this courtyard, because this is the place you built. Not the company, not me, you." Vera's breath caught. "I spent years being very good at acquiring things," he said, "and very poor at knowing which ones actually mattered. You came into my house to teach my son fractions and ended up teaching me, I think, almost everything else worth knowing. He glanced down at Finn, who had opened the box with both thumbs and was presenting it with the solemn dignity of someone who had rehearsed. Inside were 2 simple gold bands, warm, unornamented, honest. Finn helped choose them, Desmond said. He told the jeweler, "Nothing too fancy, she doesn't like showing off." He looked at Vera. He was right. Her hands were trembling slightly. She pressed them together. "Vera Tremblay," he said, and he meant every syllable of it. "Will you let me spend the rest of my life actually paying attention?" She laughed, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded. And then the tears came, the kind that arrive with relief rather than grief. She took the ring. Then she held out her hand. "On one condition," she said. "We come back here every year, to this courtyard, to remember what this was for." "Done," he said. "Agreed, signed." He slid the band onto her finger with hands that weren't quite steady. Which was, she would tell Cleo later, the most honest she had ever seen him be about anything. The people in the courtyard applauded. Finn made a sound that was equal parts cheer and small boy losing composure entirely, and threw himself at both of them at once. Vera caught him, and over his head she met Desmond's eyes. And what she found there was nothing. She had imagined, on the afternoon, she'd walked through his front door with a backpack full of worksheets and the quiet plan to keep her head down and do her job. She found a man who had finally figured out what to show. Cleo arrived later with homemade butter tarts and a look directed at Desmond that softened only slightly when he shook her hand with both of his and said, "I know I was too slow. I'm going to spend a long time making up for it." Cleo considered this for a moment. "You'd better," she said. Then she ate 3 butter tarts and told Finn that his father was considerably less terrible than she had anticipated. Finn took that as very high praise. They were married in September in that same courtyard in Hamilton, with the residents in attendance and a string quartet from a local youth music program and folding chairs that didn't quite match. The ceremony was short. The vows were honest. Finn walked Vera to the front and then stood between them for the duration, and nobody thought to ask him to move. In the last light of a September evening in Hamilton, Ontario, in a courtyard surrounded by 16 families who had waited years for something as enormous and as simple as a place to be home, Vera became the person she had always been, standing beside a man who had finally become someone worth standing next to. Finn looked up at both of them when it was done. "Can we get a dog now?" he asked. They said yes. What did you think of Vera and Desmond's story? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. We'd love to hear what score you'd give it. Subscribe to Stunning Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next.